Elon Musk just laid out the next wave of Starship upgrades, and they're not small tweaks. They're a near total rebuild of how the rocket flies, lands, and survives, because the goal isn't a working rocket anymore. It's a rocket you can fly again tomorrow. Section 1. The stakes. Why upgrades now? Right now, Starship is sitting in the hardest stretch of its entire development, and every single change Musk is pushing serves one purpose: get the whole machine reliable enough to reuse. And that's a much taller order than just reaching orbit. A rocket that launches once can be a little rough around the edges. A rocket that has to launch, land, and relaunch can't afford a single weak link. So the upgrades aren't cosmetic. They touch the engines, the fuel systems, the heat shield, the pads, and the factory all at the same time. Because Musk has decided the vehicle and the ground it launches from are no longer separate problems. They're one connected machine, and you have to upgrade all of it together or none of it works. Section 2. The Raptor engine overhaul. Now start with the engines because everything else hangs off them. The big push on Raptor right now is a strange double demand. Make them more reliable while also making them simpler and cheaper to build. That sounds contradictory until you remember these engines run at chamber pressures that basically treat the laws of physics as a polite suggestion. Raptor 3 is the version chasing that goal, stripping out external plumbing and folding it into the engine itself so there's less to fail and less to assemble. And there's a brutal catch here. These engines don't just fire once, they go through repeated ignition and shutdown cycles, and every startup and every shutdown is another chance for something to break. So Musk isn't just chasing more thrust, he's chasing an engine that can survive being switched on and off over and over without complaint. Get that wrong, and the most powerful rocket ever built becomes a very expensive way to make a crater. Section 3. Fuel, tanks, and the plumbing. Nobody talks about. Behind the engines sits the part of the rocket nobody makes thumbnails about: the fuel systems. Pipelines, pressure vessels, tank walls, thermal control. On a normal rocket, these get used once and thrown away, so they only have to survive a single brutal day. On Starship, every one of these components has to hold up while the ship travels farther and comes back more often. Cryogenic propellant is loaded at temperatures cold enough to make steel behave in ways it really doesn't want to, and then that same structure has to take the violence of launch and the heat of return. Each trip stresses the metal a little more, so the upgrades here are quieter, better pressure vessels, tougher tank structures, smarter thermal systems, but they matter just as much because reusability means none of this gets to fail even once. Section 4. The heat shield. The hardest problem. And that brings us to the single hardest challenge of the entire program: the heat shield. Because returning might genuinely be tougher than launching. Eventually, the ship has to survive atmospheric re-entry reliably enough to turn around and do it again. And the heat shield is what stands between the vehicle and total destruction. The problem is its sheer scale. We're talking thousands of individual tiles, each one facing extreme temperatures, constant vibration, and alignment tolerances so tight that a few loose tiles can ruin the whole vehicle. It's a flying jigsaw puzzle wrapped in controlled plasma. And here's the part that makes it so hard. SpaceX doesn't need it to work once. They need it to work again and again, every single flight with no time for repairs in between. A heat shield that survives one re-entry is a science experiment. A heat shield that survives 100 is a business. That gap is exactly what these upgrades are trying to close. Section 5. The pads evolve with the vehicle. But you can build a perfect rocket and still lose everything on the ground, which is why the upgrades don't stop at the vehicle. The launch infrastructure is evolving just as fast. The orbital launch mount, the flame trench, the flame bucket, these structures absorb the direct violence of 33 engines firing at once. And violence really is the right word, because that's less like a launch and more like the Earth briefly regretting its decisions. Pad 2 already introduced a tougher mount and an upgraded flame trench, and Pad 1 is being rebuilt to match. Then there's the tower itself. The chopsticks that have to lift, stack, and eventually catch returning boosters out of the sky, which still sounds absurd every time it's said out loud. Add the communication hardware up top, and the SQD arm that stays connected to the vehicle until the final moment before ignition. And you've got a pile of systems all exposed to incredible stress on every flight. Every one of them is getting reinforced because the pad and the rocket are now the same machine. Section 6. Redundancy. Why one pad isn't enough, and reinforcing each pad leads straight into the bigger upgrade in how SpaceX thinks about the ground itself. Because Musk has said the part that actually scares him isn't losing a ship or a booster. Those are replaceable now. It's losing a launch stand. SpaceX can crank out new vehicles, but a destroyed pad takes far longer to rebuild, and that's the one failure that could freeze the whole program. So the fix is redundancy on a scale that sounds almost ridiculous. SpaceX already runs 2 stands at Starbase, with Pad 1 being rebuilt while Pad 2 carries the load. Over in Florida, LC-39A is being reworked, and the company is clearing SLC-37 to build 2 more stands there. Count it all up, and SpaceX is effectively building 5 Starship pads. 5 for a single rocket, when it conquered most of the launch market with just 3 Falcon 9 pads. And even that may not be the ceiling, because the company keeps hinting at offshore platforms out at sea and new launch regions beyond Texas and Florida. The logic is simple. If one pad goes down, another keeps flying. If one site becomes unavailable, launches shift elsewhere. The program never stops. Section 7. The factory behind the upgrades. And none of this works if SpaceX can only build a handful of vehicles a year, which is why the factory itself is the upgrade nobody sees. Starfactory is built less like a traditional aerospace plant and more like a car factory, borrowing the mass production philosophy that built Tesla's gigafactories. Linear production lines, segmented assembly zones, automation, rapid workflows. The goal was never handcrafted rockets. The goal is industrial scale output, because rapid reuse only works if you can also build fast when something does go wrong. On top of that, SpaceX is raising enormous new gigabays at both Starbase and in Florida. Bigger, wider buildings designed to assemble many vehicles at once and to handle future Starship variants. So the upgrades aren't just on the rocket, they're baked into the machine that makes the Rock Section 8. The production numbers. And the numbers Musk has put behind that factory are genuinely hard to believe. He said the production pipeline is full and on track for roughly 10 more ships and about half that many boosters in a single year. 10 ships and 5 boosters would sound aggressive for a small rocket. For something the size of Starship, it borders on unhinged, but there's logic underneath it. The lower booster count reflects growing confidence in booster recovery, since SpaceX has already shown it can bring Super Heavy back and reuse it. Ship recovery is the less mature half of the equation, so more ships are still needed while the re-entry systems keep improving. And if those targets actually land, the totals get staggering, pushing the fleet deep into the dozens of vehicles built. That's the whole point of the upgrades coming together. Better engines, a survivable heat shield, hardened pads, and a factory fast enough to feed all of it. Step back and you can see what Musk is actually building. Other rockets simply launch. Starship is trying to launch, land, relaunch, and repeat at a scale nobody has ever attempted. And that single ambition is what's driving every upgrade, from the engine bells to the heat shield tiles to the steel of the factory floor. The vehicle and the pad and the production line have stopped being separate things. They're becoming one giant operational machine, and each upgrade is just another part of that machine clicking into place. So what upgrade do you think matters most? The engines, the heat shield, or the pads? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want to keep following Starship's development as it happens, give this one a like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.